From again OMNR. She'll be speaking about Lake Whitefish research, new findings on diet and habitat use. Before you get started, one more thing I just wanted to mention: there's a talk that didn't make it to the printed agenda on voter status, and that'll be following this one rather than the one that's listed, which will come afterwards. Sorry about that.
All right, morning everyone. My name is Emma Bloomfield. I'm with the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources. We're going to keep the Lake Whitefish train going, and I'm going to talk about some work I've been working on diet and habitat. This is with co-authors listed on the slide, and in particular Ben Lena's in the room and Tim Johnson. So to start off, why are Lake Whitefish important? Maybe not something I need to tell you guys, but in Lake Ontario waters, they support a commercial fishery, including making up over 30% of the harvest by weight, and they are also an important component of the benthic food web, as well as a culturally valuable species, particularly with a long history of being harvested by First Nations. So the management context of how this work fits in, one of the fish community objectives is to increase Lake Whitefish abundance in northeastern waters. And one of the ways this is achieved is through the Carignan Restoration Framework, which has been touched on in a number of talks today and yesterday. But this is a framework endorsed by the Council of Lake Committees to restore cisco and whitefishes to the Great Lakes. And this is an adaptive framework shown in the schematic on the right there. But the first step in this is the planning phase, which includes identifying the threats to restoration. So one of these threats, or one of these impediments for Lake Whitefish in Lake Ontario is the low availability of high quality benthic prey. In particular, when we had the invasion of zebra and quagga mussels, the diparia, an energy-rich amphipod that was Lake Whitefish's main prey, collapsed, and with it we see a decline in the catch per unit effort and the condition of Lake Whitefish, which Sarah shared as well. There was a diet study after the loss of diparia finding that Lake Whitefish had tried to supplement some of their diet with dry-stinted mussels, but that the energy of these was not as high, not sufficient, and ultimately that the diet was one of the reasons for these changes. But it's been 20 years since there's been a comprehensive study on Lake Whitefish diet in Lake Ontario, and there's been a number of other changes within the system. So one of these is the increase in round goby abundance starting in about 2005, and then we also see changes in the zooplankton community, particularly increases in invasive zooplankton spiny water flea. So it leads to the first question: what is the current diet of Lake Whitefish in Lake Ontario? Briefly, the methods evolved looking at the stomach contents. They really provide a snapshot of diet on hours to days. And then another component was looking at the average energy in a stomach. So one of the tools we used here is bomb calorimetry on prey, so basically a controlled burn of a prey type, figuring out how much energy is released. And what we end up with is something like when you look at a food label and you see the calories on the label there. So moving into some results from this is the stomach contents by volume for spring, summer, and fall. We see in the spring is that the stomach contents are dominated by chironomids or non-biting midges. A single stomach could have over 1,000. And then in the summer, we see that by volume, the contents are now dominated by round gobies. So we see a single stomach being opened up here, a number of goby, quite small ones, around 20 to 25 millimeters total length. In the fall, a little more variability. We see the spiny water flea, Bethotrephes, and some amphipods, and dry-stinted mussels still there. If we compare this to what the diet was 20 years ago, there are some differences. The main one I really want to highlight here is that 20 years ago in the summer, over 70% used to be dry-stinted mussels, and now we see that this is round goby. What are some of the consequences of this change in terms of the energy, which is important to look at because it's what will impact the growth and condition of Lake Whitefish. So we see the average energy density in a stomach in the figure there, and the main finding is that there's over 2.5 times more energy in the summer diet now than there was in 2003. And what's really driving this is that brown goby have a higher energy density than Dreissena mussels, and there's been that kind of change in diet. Some conclusions from this component of the work is that lake whitefish diet has really strong seasonal patterns. So if you're just looking at it for part of the year, you're going to miss kind of the larger overall trends going on. And then also we've seen a large change in the diet. So we see this shift from Dreissena mussels to brown goby, and with that an increase in the energy density in the stomach. One of the implications of this is that prey availability might be less of an impediment to increasing lake whitefish populations than it was 20 years ago, although still not as ideal as if the preferred prey was there. So diets are kind of one piece of the puzzle here. Another component is that it's possible that lake whitefish's spatial distribution has changed along with their diet. We typically think of lake whitefish as being benthic. A lot of what we know about their distribution comes from bottom set gear, like gill nets, and that their diet was previously dominated by diparia, which are bottom dwelling and in quite deep waters. There's been a few studies, my Granny and colleagues, finding that lake whitefish's distribution in terms of the depth that they're caught has changed through some of these the loss of diparia. So second objective is to look at the current spatial distribution. So since the telemetry study Sarah spoke about, Lake Ontario has been gridded with receivers, or these listening stations, and into the system we introduced 91 lake whitefish that were tagged with acoustic tags. So from this we can figure out the approximate location, and then we also had some pressure sensitive tags to figure out the depth of fish. These were caught and then tagged and released at the Star there, Prince Edward County around Point Peter, if people are familiar with the area. So this map shows where we detected the fish. The lighter the color, the more often fish were found in that area. Some key findings here are we see that the home range is restricted to eastern Lake Ontario. Sarah did mention there were a few detections along the south shore, but this is just a couple individuals and very kind of brief forays into that area. Their home range is really focused on this area. Even within the eastern Lake Ontario, they're using kind of limited areas here. We really see that they're focused, see if my laser pointer works. Yeah, they're really focused on the south shore of Prince Edward County here, going around, and then the Blue Ridge, which extends from Prince Edward County over into U.S. waters. It's really become this whitefish highway that goes along there. It's this area of shallower water. Okay, so also looked at fish depth. Again, we had some of these tags were pressure sensitive. Big finding here is that the average depth was 20 to 30 meters, about 65 to 100 feet for majority of the year, except for when we look at November and December, where we think this shallower depth is associated with spawning behavior. We also looked at if fish were benthic. So the dotted line there's 5 meters off the bottom, and below which we're defining as benthic habitat use. Kind of reveal this in parts because there's some distinct behaviors here. So January through June, we see that the majority of the time is spent benthic, with sometimes spent pelagic. The average depth is about 5 meters off bottom. And this aligns well with what we saw in the stomach contents, where the spring diet was dominated by chironomids, specifically in their larval form, so they're going to be on the bottom. This is before they're pupating and coming to the surface. And then July through September, we see this range of benthic and kind of more suspended behavior. They're about 10 meters off bottom is the mean. And again, there's a general alignment with what we saw in the summer diet. So we have benthic round gobies, but then there's a number of stomachs that didn't have any round gobies and had pelagic zooplankton as well. Then moving into October to December, see it's more kind of bimodal here. About 50% of the time they're benthic, about 50% of the time they're more suspended. And this lines up with the fall diet well again. So we have pelagic zooplankton, and then we also have amphipods and Dreissena mussels. Okay, so conclusions for this. We have another kind of pieces of the puzzle here. The findings that we saw limited areas of eastern Lake Ontario were used. We saw less benthic habitat use than was expected for a species that's always been typically thought of as being primarily benthic. We also see a general alignment of the diet and habitat use. And then for future work, really excited to be expanding our understanding of their energy sources with some ecological tracers, specifically stable isotopes. So getting a better idea of their overall energy there, and then as well as kind of combining what we're seeing with the diet and what we're seeing with the movement into bioenergetics modeling to understand how these changes impact their growth rates. With that, I'd like to say a big thank you for fantastic students for lab support for processing samples, the Lake Ontario Management Unit that we worked with to tag the fish, stomach content identification support from Carolina and Sonia, and then the commercial fisher we worked with, Tim McCormick. And thank you all for listening. Be happy to take questions.